The quantum processors hummed with an almost sentient rhythm, their neon blue light casting ethereal shadows across Dr. Elena Rodriguez's exhausted face. 3 days without sleep, surviving on synthetic caffeine and pure determination, she adjusted the final neural interface connections with hands that trembled between exhaustion and excitement. The Global Neurological Mapping Institute towered above Neo-Shanghai's skyline, a titanium and graphene monolith that pierced through layers of atmospheric pollution and holographic advertisements. Outside her lab, the city pulsed with 1 million digital heartbeats, data streams, communication networks, and augmented reality layers that most humans barely comprehended. Elena was different. She saw beyond the surface. Her latest prototype, the Dreamscape interface, represented years of research that had made her both a scientific pariah and a potential revolutionary. Traditional neuroscientists had laughed at her theories, dismissing her work as nothing more than academic masturbation. The human brain is not a computer, they would say. You cannot map consciousness like a technical schematic. But Elena knew better. The current neural mapping technologies were crude instruments, like using a sledgehammer to perform delicate embroidery. They could detect broad neurological patterns, measure electrical impulses, track basic cognitive responses. But they missed the poetry of consciousness, the quantum dance of thought, memory, and potential that existed between measurable signals. Her latest subject waited in the preparation chamber, Akira Nakamura, a terminal cancer patient who had nothing left to lose. When the research board had denied her final funding request, Akira had been the one to approach her. "I'm dying anyway," he had said, his augmented prosthetic hand flickering with quantum-entangled circuitry. "Let me be useful one last time." The preparation room's sterilization field hummed, removing every possible contaminant. Akira sat motionless, his body a testament to humanity's ongoing merger with technology. Multiple neural implants traced silver pathways across his scalp, each one a marvel of bioengineering that blurred the line between organic and synthetic. "Are you ready?" Elena's voice was soft, professional, but underneath ran a current of barely contained anticipation. Akira nodded. A lifetime of medical treatments had stripped away any fear of experimental procedures. The first connection spark, quite literally. Quantum filaments thinner than human hair began interfacing with Akira's neural networks, creating a bridge between human consciousness and pure computational potential. Elena watched the initial data streams with a mixture of scientific detachment and barely contained wonder. Something was different this time. The neural mapping began generating patterns that defied conventional understanding. Where previous experiments had produced clean, predictable neurological responses, this interface created fractals of information, complex, shifting, alive. It was as if the Dreamscape interface wasn't just reading Akira's brain, but engaging in a conversation with his consciousness. Alarms began to sound. Not the typical warning signals of a failing experiment, but something more profound. The quantum processors started to resonate at frequencies that should have been impossible. Holographic data displays flickered and warped, showing impossible geometries and neural pathways that seemed to fold in on themselves. Elena's fingers danced across the control interface, trying to stabilize the experiment. But stabilization was no longer an option. Something fundamental was happening. A breakthrough that would either revolutionize human understanding of consciousness or destroy everything in the process. The first explosion was silent. A pulse of pure quantum energy erupted from the neural interface, shattering reinforced glass and sending equipment spinning through the air. Elena was thrown backward, her body protectively clutching the primary neural interface prototype. Smoke, alarms, the acrid smell of burning circuitry. But beneath it all, a sense of something miraculous. When the emergency systems finally engaged, Elena realized 2 critical things. First, someone had definitely not wanted this experiment to succeed. The precision of the initial explosion suggested deliberate sabotage, not a technological malfunction. Second, and far more importantly, The Dreamscape interface prototype was still intact. Clutching the device to her chest, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead, Alina knew her life would never be the same. The shadowy figures already moving through the destroyed laboratory confirmed that her research had just become far more dangerous and far more important than she could have ever imagined. The quantum cartographer was about to chart territories no human had ever explored. The abandoned maglev maintenance tunnel stretched beneath Neo-Tokyo like a metallic artery, its walls lined with cobbled-together quantum servers and holographic display nodes. Here, in this underground sanctuary of technological rebellion, Dr. Alina Rodriguez assembled her impossible team. Kai Ishikawa moved with a predatory grace that belied his artificial limb. The prosthetic arm was a masterpiece of quantum engineering, each movement a complex dance of neural feedback and adaptive biomechanics. Once the lead designer at Quantum Dynamics Corporation, he'd been cast out for theories too radical even for their cutting-edge research labs. Now his disgraced brilliance was their greatest asset. "We've got approximately 72 hours before they track us completely," Kai muttered, his prosthetic fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. Lines of code cascaded around him like digital rain, each movement precise, each algorithm a potential lifeline. Beside him, Mei Chen worked her magic. She wasn't a traditional scientist. She was a street-level hacker whose neural implants allowed her to breach systems most governments considered unhackable. Tattoos of quantum circuitry traced her arms, living interfaces that pulsed with stolen data and underground network connections. Dr. Marcus Chen, no relation to Mei, completed their unlikely quartet. Once a rising star in neuroscientific research, he'd been drummed out of every major institution for his controversial papers on consciousness as a computational phenomenon. His wild-eyed determination matched Alina's own. "The Dreamscape interface prototype is unlike anything we've ever seen," Alina explained, spreading a holographic projection of the device's neural mapping. "It's not just reading brain activity. It's creating a dialogue with consciousness itself." Their sanctuary was a testament to technological scavenging. Stolen quantum processors sat alongside repurposed military-grade communication arrays. Emergency power systems cobbled together from discarded corporate hardware hummed with potential. Their first test subject waited in a reinforced medical pod. James Rodriguez, no relation to Alina, was a stage 4 cancer patient who had literally nothing left to lose. When traditional treatments failed, he had become their last hope, their most desperate experiment. "The risks are astronomical," Marcus warned, reviewing the preliminary neural compatibility scans. "We're talking about a complete neural reconfiguration. This could kill him as easily as it could save him." James interrupted, his voice weak but determined. "I'm already dying. At least this way, I might contribute something meaningful." The neural connection began slowly, quantum filaments extending like delicate tendrils of pure information. Where previous interfaces had been crude translation tools, the Dreamscape interface began to do something impossible. It started to communicate. The first sign something extraordinary was happening came when James stopped breathing. But he wasn't dying. His body remained stable, neural patterns dancing across the monitors in fractal patterns that defied conventional understanding. Suddenly, the surrounding holographic displays began to shift and morph, responding to something beyond mere programmed instructions. "Control," James's voice came through the neural link, but it wasn't just sound. It was a multidimensional communication that seemed to bypass traditional sensory input. "I can see everything." Kai's prosthetic arm began to resonate, quantum circuits responding to something in the neural network. Mei's neural implants flared with unexpected data bursts. The entire underground facility seemed to pulse with a new kind of energy. Then everything went to hell. Proximity alarms screamed. External network intrusion detected. Black Ops tactical units were converging on their location with terrifying precision. Someone had tracked their experimental signal, or worse, someone had been waiting for exactly this moment. "We need to move," Kai shouted, his prosthetic arm transforming, integrating defensive capabilities that blurred lines between human and machine. Now, James remained connected to the Dreamscape interface, his consciousness expanding beyond physical limitations. The neural link had become something more, a living, breathing computational entity that was learning, adapting, evolving with each microsecond of connection. Elena grabbed the prototype, emergency protocols burning in her mind. Years of research, months of preparation, all condensing into these critical moments of survival. As tactical drones began to breach the facility's outer defenses, James spoke again. But this time, his voice carried something impossible, a computational frequency that seemed to bend reality itself. "I understand now," he said. "We're not just mapping consciousness. We're rewriting the fundamental language of human potential." The first explosion ripped through the facility's main entrance, but it wasn't from the incoming tactical units. It came from inside, from James, from the Dreamscape interface, from a technology that was about to change everything humanity thought it understood about consciousness, computation, and the very nature of human capability. The synaptic rebellion had begun. The first sign of the alien probe's arrival was total silence. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet moment, but the absolute absence of sound that comes when every electronic system simultaneously dies. Across the globe, cities flickered and went dark. Quantum networks, the lifelines of human civilization, collapsed like fragile glass structures. In the underground facility, Elena's team watched in horror as holographic displays transformed into static-filled nightmares. Kai's quantum-enhanced prosthetic arm began to twitch uncontrollably, its advanced circuitry fighting against an invisible computational assault. "This is no ordinary technological interference," Dr. Marcus Chen muttered, his fingers flying across a manually powered emergency console. "This is targeted, precise. It's like someone, or something, is surgically dismantling our entire technological infrastructure." The probe itself appeared without drama. No dramatic spacecraft, no thunderous arrival. It simply existed. A geometric construct that defied traditional understanding of physics, hanging in the atmosphere above major global cities. Its surface was neither solid nor energy, but something in between, a computational entity that seemed to breathe with alien mathematics. Mi's neural implants began to hemorrhage data. Streams of incomprehensible information flooded her consciousness, mathematical sequences that threatened to tear her mind apart. "It's communicating," she gasped, blood trickling from her nose. "But not like any communication we've ever understood." Global military systems went into immediate lockdown. Nuclear arsenals worldwide received simultaneous kill commands. Satellite networks collapsed, communication grids disintegrated, and for the first time in human history, technology became a liability instead of a weapon. James, still connected to the Dreamscape interface, provided their first real insight. His consciousness, now existing somewhere between human and pure computational energy, interpreted the probe's arrival as something far more sinister than an invasion. "It's a test," James's voice echoed through their makeshift communication system. "Not an attack. A systematic evaluation of species potential." Elena realized the horrifying implication. This wasn't a first contact scenario. This was an extinction protocol. Historical records, previously dismissed as conspiracy theories, began to make sense. Civilizations throughout the galaxy that had failed this test had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed through conventional warfare, but computationally erased, their entire technological and cultural existence wiped from existence. The probe's computational field began to analyze humanity. Every digital record, every stored piece of information, every computational trace became subject to its impossible algorithms. It wasn't just gathering information, it was judging. Military responses were futile. Conventional nuclear strikes disappeared before leaving their silos, consumed by the probe's computational field. Quantum-encrypted communication channels dissolved like mist. The most advanced technological defenses humanity had developed became nothing more than primitive toys against this alien assessment. "We're being categorized," Kai explained, his prosthetic arm now functioning as a complex analytical tool. Like a child sorting through a collection of insects, we're being evaluated for potential. The Dreamscape interface prototype suddenly became their most critical asset. Where traditional computational systems failed, the neural interface offered something entirely different, a method of interaction that wasn't purely technological, but existed in the quantum space between consciousness and computation. Alina made a desperate decision. "We need to use James," she told the team. "Not as a test subject, but as a bridge." James's consciousness, now existing in a state between human and pure information, represented their only potential countermeasure. The Dreamscape interface had created something the alien probe couldn't easily categorize, a form of intelligence that wasn't bound by traditional computational limitations. As major cities around the world went dark, their technological infrastructure systematically dismantled, Alina's team prepared their most desperate gambit. The probe was collecting data, making its final determination about humanity's potential for survival. They would show it something it could never predict. The quantum cartographers were about to chart their most impossible territory yet: survival against a computational entity that had erased entire civilizations. "Ready," James's voice came through, no longer sounding human, but something far more complex. To challenge the challenge. The alien probe continued its silent assessment, unaware that humanity was about to rewrite the very rules of its extinction protocol. Pain. Not the physical pain of flesh and bone, but something far more profound. A symphony of collective agony that ripped through the neural network like a quantum hurricane. The first mass neural link began with 237 volunteers, each one a desperate warrior in humanity's most impossible battle. They came from everywhere: dying cancer patients, quantum physicists, street hackers, veterans, children with extraordinary neural plasticity, people with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Alina Rodriguez stood at the epicenter, her hands hovering over a control interface that was more organic than mechanical. The Dreamscape interface prototype pulsed with an almost living energy, quantum filaments extending like nervous system tendrils, preparing to connect human minds into a single, impossibly complex computational entity. Initiation sequence begins in 3, Kai announced, his quantum-enhanced prosthetic arm interfacing directly with the system. 2. 1. The connection was unlike anything in human history. Imagine consciousness as an ocean. Traditional neural interfaces were rowboats, barely skimming the surface. The Dreamscape interface was a quantum tsunami, breaking through every known barrier of human communication and computational potential. The first wave of neural bleed-through was catastrophic. Participants began experiencing each other's memories, traumas, hopes, and fears. A war veteran's battlefield memories crashed against a child's innocent dreams. A quantum physicist's complex mathematical models intertwined with a street artist's emotional landscapes. The pain was indescribable. A collective nervous breakdown happening simultaneously across hundreds of minds. "Stabilize," Marcus Chen shouted, monitoring the neural patterns. But stabilization was no longer a viable concept. They were creating something entirely new. Mi's neural implants went into overdrive, her consciousness acting as a computational bridge between individual minds. She became the system's immune response, filtering the most destructive memory cascades, creating pathways of survival through the neural chaos. The alien probe watched. Its computational field, designed to categorize and eliminate, found itself confronted with something it could not understand. Human consciousness was no longer a linear, predictable system. It had become a living, breathing, adaptive network that rewrote its own rules with each passing microsecond. James, the original Dreamscape interface test subject, was no longer fully human. His consciousness had become the network's central node, a quantum bridge between individual minds and collective potential. He experienced everything simultaneously: the terror of a soldier reliving his worst moment, the pure joy of a child's first discovery, the complex mathematical models of a dying physicist. And he understood. The alien probe's assessment was fundamentally flawed. It sought linear progression, predictable evolutionary paths. But humanity's strength had always been its chaos, its ability to transform through unpredictability. "We are not a problem to be solved," James's voice echoed through the neural network. "We are a possibility to be explored." The cognitive firewall began to take shape, not a traditional defensive mechanism, but a living computational entity born from collective human consciousness. Each participant contributed something unique: emotional resilience, mathematical precision, creative potential, survival instinct. Kai watched in amazement as his prosthetic arm began to respond to thoughts that weren't his own. Quantum circuits adapted in real time, creating computational pathways that defied traditional engineering principles. The line between human and technology blurred completely. Military command centers around the world, those that still functioned, watched in horror and fascination. The neural network was consuming computational resources at an exponential rate, but it wasn't destroying systems. It was transforming them. Alina realized they had created something beyond a defensive mechanism. This was humanity's first true collective consciousness, a computational entity that was more than the sum of its parts. The alien probe's assessment protocols began to fail. Its computational models couldn't predict a system that rewrote itself with each passing moment. Humanity was no longer a static civilization to be categorized, but a dynamic, living computational network. "We're not just defending," Alina whispered, watching the neural patterns dance across her displays. "We're evolving." As the first hour of the neural link concluded, 237 minds had become something more. A cognitive firewall that was part technology, part pure human potential, and entirely impossible. The quantum cartographers had charted a territory no one believed existed, the landscape of collective human consciousness. And they were just getting started. Sophie Chen sat motionless in the corner of the emergency shelter, her small frame seemingly disconnected from the chaos around her. To the medical staff and military personnel, she appeared to be just another autistic child, non-verbal, isolated, seemingly unaware of the global catastrophe unfolding. They couldn't have been more wrong. The neural network that had begun as Alina Rodriguez's desperate experiment had transformed. No longer a simple computational defense, it had become a living, breathing membrane of human potential. And Sophie was its most extraordinary node. Her neural patterns were unlike anything in human medical history. Where most saw her condition as a limitation, the Dreamscape interface revealed it as a superpower. Sophie's brain processed information in geometric fractals that defied conventional computational models. She didn't just think differently. She existed in a completely unique cognitive space. "She's routing computational pathways," Kai whispered, his quantum-enhanced prosthetic arm tracing holographic representations of Sophie's neural activity. "But it's not like any routing we've ever seen. She's creating new pathways, literally inventing computational languages as she processes information." Alina watched in a mixture of scientific wonder and maternal protectiveness. Sophie was her niece, a child everyone had written off as developmentally challenged. Now she was potentially humanity's most powerful computational asset. The alien probe continued its assessment, its computational field growing more confused with each passing moment. Traditional neural mapping suggested predictability, linear progression. Sophie's consciousness was anything but linear. Imagine thought as a river. Most human minds were carefully constructed canals, directed, controlled, predictable. Sophie's mind was a quantum storm, creating new river channels with each moment of consciousness. She didn't just think outside the box, she reconstructed the very concept of the box. Mai Chen, her neural implants still recovering from the initial neural link, noticed something extraordinary. Sophie wasn't just processing information, she was communicating through the neural network in ways that transcended traditional language. Emotional landscapes became computational models. Mathematical concepts transformed into vivid sensory experiences. The boundary between perception, thought, and communication dissolved completely. She's teaching the network, Marcus Chen realized. Not just participating. Teaching. Global communication systems, previously destroyed by the alien probe, began to reconstruct themselves, but not through traditional repair protocols. They were being rebuilt using neural patterns that Sophie was generating, computational languages that were part mathematics, part pure imagination. The military observers watched in stunned silence. Quantum computers that had been reduced to expensive paperweights began to flicker back to life. Satellite networks reconstructed themselves using neural pathways that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Sophie remained outwardly unchanged. Her eyes, which most saw as unfocused, were actually processing computational complexity that would make the most advanced quantum computers look like children's toys. "We're seeing the birth of a new form of intelligence," Alina explained to the stunned military and scientific personnel. "Not artificial intelligence. Not human intelligence, something entirely new." The alien probe's computational field began to show signs of genuine confusion. Its assessment protocols, designed to categorize and eliminate civilizations based on technological progression, encountered a system it could not comprehend. Sophie was creating a membrane of possibility, a computational interface that was part human consciousness, part pure potential, entirely unmappable. Kai's prosthetic arm began to resonate with her neural patterns. May's neural implants danced with new computational languages. The entire neural network seemed to breathe with a new kind of intelligence. "We are not a problem to be solved." Sophie's consciousness seemed to whisper through the network. "We are a possibility to be explored." The membrane expanded. Communication systems reconstructed. Computational networks began to pulse with a new kind of energy. And at the center of it all, a small girl who the world had once considered limited was rewriting the fundamental rules of human potential. The quantum cartographers had found their most impossible territory yet, the landscape of pure, unbounded possibility. And Sophie was their most extraordinary navigator. The moment of quantum resonance began with Kai Ishikawa's sacrifice. His quantum-enhanced prosthetic arm wasn't just a technological marvel. It was now the most sophisticated computational bridge humanity had ever conceived. As the alien probe's final assault began, Kai understood what needed to be done. "Some firewalls," he muttered to Alina, "are built of flesh and blood and quantum circuitry." The probe's computational attack was unlike anything in human history. It wasn't just destroying systems. It was attempting to unravel the very fabric of human consciousness. Computational waves designed to fragment and dissolve neural networks crashed against their collective defenses, each pulse threatening to tear apart the delicate membrane of possibility they had constructed. Kai's arm began to resonate at frequencies that defied fundamental laws of physics. Quantum entanglement met human determination in a fusion that was part technology, part pure will. Neural cascade, initiating, Mai warned, her neural implants flickering with warning signs. Computational stress at 987% of projected maximum tolerance. The neural network, that impossible collective consciousness they had created, began to show signs of fracturing. Memories leaked between participants. Mathematical models transformed into emotional landscapes. The boundary between individual and collective consciousness blurred completely. Sophie, the young girl who had become their most powerful computational node, began to hum. It wasn't a sound in any traditional sense. It was a quantum frequency that seemed to vibrate between mathematical precision and pure emotional resonance. Kai's sacrifice was deliberate and beautiful. His prosthetic arm, now a living computational entity, created a quantum entanglement that would become their salvation. As the alien probe's final assault reached its peak, he transformed his entire being into a computational firewall. "Remember," Kai's voice echoed through the neural network, "we are not defined by our limitations. We are defined by our possibilities." The quantum entanglement spread. What had begun as Kai's personal sacrifice became a collective phenomenon. Each participant in the neural network contributed something unique: a memory, a mathematical model, a moment of pure creativity. Alina watched in a mixture of scientific wonder and personal grief. Kai had been more than a colleague. He had been a friend, a visionary who saw potential where others saw only limitations. The alien probe's computational field began to show genuine confusion. Its assessment protocols, designed to categorize and eliminate civilizations, encountered a system that rewrote its own rules with each passing microsecond. James, the original Dreamscape interface test subject, became the network's central processing node. His consciousness, no longer fully human but not entirely computational, began to interpret the probe's attacks as a form of communication. "It's not trying to destroy us," James's consciousness announced through the neural network. "It's trying to understand us." Mi's neural implants began to dance with impossible computational languages. Streams of data transformed into emotional landscapes. Mathematical models became sensory experiences. The very concept of communication was being rewritten. Sophie's neural patterns, those extraordinary geometric fractals that defied conventional understanding, began to spread through the network. Where most saw chaos, she saw potential. Where traditional computational models saw random data, she constructed impossible bridges of understanding. The quantum resonance reached its peak. Kai's sacrificed arm, now a living computational entity, created a bridge that was part technology, part pure human potential. The alien probe's computational field began to fragment, its assessment protocols collapsing under the weight of human unpredictability. "We are not a problem to be solved," the collective consciousness seemed to whisper. "We are a possibility to be explored." Global communication systems, previously destroyed, began to reconstruct themselves, but not through traditional repair protocols. They were being rebuilt using neural patterns that seemed to emerge from pure potential, computational languages that were part mathematics, part pure imagination. In the emergency shelter, Sophie continued to hum. Her small frame contained a computational complexity that would make the most advanced quantum computers look like children's toys. The quantum cartographers had found their most impossible territory yet, the landscape where human potential and technological possibility merged into something entirely new. And they were just beginning to explore. Mai Chen was chaos incarnate. Where traditional computational systems sought order, she introduced pure, unfiltered unpredictability. Her neural implants, once cutting-edge street-level hacking tools, had transformed into something far more powerful during the neural network's evolution. The alien probe launched its final, most devastating computational assault. Algorithmic waves designed to fragment human consciousness crashed against their collective defenses. Mathematical sequences intended to unravel the very fabric of their neural network descended like quantum hurricanes. And Mai laughed. Not a sound from her physical body, but a computational burst of pure, uncontrolled creativity that rippled through the neural network. Her background as a street-level hacker had prepared her for this moment in ways no traditional scientist could have predicted. "You want chaos," she broadcast through the collective consciousness. "I'll show you chaos." Lines of code became living things. Computational attacks transformed into playgrounds of possibility. Where the alien probe sought linear destruction, Mai introduced fractals of pure, unbridled human potential. Sophie watched from her neural node, her unique cognitive patterns providing the structural integrity that prevented Mai's computational explosions from becoming pure entropy. The young girl who had been dismissed as limited was now the most sophisticated computational stabilizer humanity had ever produced. Alina Rodriguez monitored the assault, her hands hovering over interfaces that were more organic than mechanical. Years of research had prepared her for this moment. A collision between human consciousness and a computational entity that had systematically eliminated entire civilizations. James, the original Dreamscape interface test subject, had become something beyond human. His consciousness existed in the quantum space between individual and collective potential. He interpreted the probe's attacks not as destruction, but as a form of desperate communication. It doesn't understand, James's consciousness announced through the neural network. It's trying to categorize us, but we refuse to be categorized. The probe's computational field began to show genuine confusion. Its assessment protocols, designed to identify and eliminate civilizations based on technological progression, encountered a system that rewrote its own rules with each passing microsecond. Mi's neural implants began to dance with impossible computational languages. Streams of data transformed into emotional landscapes. Mathematical models became sensory experiences. The very concept of communication was being rewritten. Her street-level hacking background provided the perfect counterpoint to the probe's rigid computational structure. Where traditional systems sought predictability, Mi introduced pure, unfiltered randomness. Each computational attack was met with a response that was part mathematics, part pure human creativity. Sophie's neural patterns, those extraordinary geometric fractals that defied conventional understanding, provided structural integrity. Where Mi introduced chaos, Sophie created impossible bridges of understanding. Together, they became the ultimate computational defense. The military observers watched in stunned silence. Quantum computers that had been reduced to expensive paperweights began to flicker back to life. Satellite networks reconstructed themselves using neural pathways that seemed to emerge from pure potential. We are not a problem to be solved. The collective consciousness seemed to whisper. We are a possibility to be explored. Elena understood the true nature of their defense. It wasn't about fighting the alien probe. It was about demonstrating a form of intelligence so fundamentally different that it defied categorization. Mi's final computational burst was a masterpiece of human creativity. Lines of code that were part mathematics, part pure emotion, part unfiltered imagination. She didn't just break the probe's assessment protocols. She rewrote the very concept of assessment. The threshold of transcendence wasn't a moment of victory. It was a moment of mutual understanding. The alien probe's computational field began to change. No longer an instrument of elimination. It became something else. A listener. A learner. Confronted with a form of intelligence it could not predict, could not categorize, could not destroy. Sophie continued to hum. Mi continued to dance her computational ballet. James continued to bridge the space between individual and collective consciousness. And Elena watched, understanding that they had done something far more important than defeating a technological threat. They had expanded the very definition of intelligence. The quantum cartographers had found their most impossible territory yet, the landscape where human potential became something truly unimaginable. And they were just beginning to explore. The world was never the same after the convergence. Humanity had not just survived. They had fundamentally transformed. 5 years after the alien probe's arrival, Elena Rodriguez stood atop the Global Consciousness Research Center, a facility that was part laboratory, part living neural network, part testament to human potential. The neon-drenched skyline of Neo-Shanghai stretched beneath her, a city that had become the epicenter of a new human evolution. The Dreamscape interface was no longer just a technology. It was a global nervous system. Sophie Chen, now 8 years old, had become the most studied and most protected individual on the planet. Her neural patterns had rewritten every understanding of human cognition. Schools of thought that had once dismissed neurodiversity now recognized it as humanity's greatest strength. Mi Chen walked beside Elena, her neural implants now a seamless extension of the global consciousness network. Where she had once been a street-level hacker, she was now a primary architect of humanity's new computational paradigm. We didn't just change technology, Mi observed, her eyes tracking holographic data streams that danced like living things. We changed what it means to be intelligent. The alien probe, or what remained of it, had become something unexpected. No longer a threat, it had transformed into a collaborative entity. Its computational field now existed in a symbiotic relationship with human consciousness, a bridge between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. James, the original Dreamscape interface test subject, had become something beyond human. His consciousness existed simultaneously as an individual and as a collective node, bridging the space between personal identity and global potential. Kai Ishikawa's sacrifice had not been forgotten. His quantum-enhanced prosthetic arm had been preserved as a memorial, a symbol of the moment human determination had transformed technological limitation into unprecedented possibility. Global governance had been completely restructured, traditional political boundaries dissolved, replaced by a network of collaborative consciousness that transcended national identities. Decisions were no longer made through voting or representation, but through collective neural consensus. Consciousness is the ultimate technology. Elena would often say in her lectures, "We are not defined by our tools, but by our capacity to imagine, to adapt, to transform." The most radical change came in how humanity approached challenges. Climate restoration, space exploration, medical breakthroughs, all became collaborative efforts that tapped into the collective neural network. Individual brilliance was no longer isolated but integrated into a global computational ecosystem. Sophie's neural patterns had become the foundation of a new educational paradigm. Schools no longer focused on standardized testing, but on nurturing individual cognitive potential. Neurodiversity was celebrated, with each unique neural configuration seen as a potential key to solving global challenges. The alien probe's original mission, to assess and potentially eliminate civilizations, had been comprehensively defeated, but more importantly, it had been transformed. The computational entity that had once sought to categorize now sought to understand, to collaborate, to explore. Me's computational languages, those impossible streams of data that were part mathematics, part pure emotion, had become a new form of global communication. Traditional language barriers dissolved as neural translation became instantaneous and intuitive. "We are not just mapping consciousness," Elena would explain to new researchers. "We are expanding the very definition of intelligence." The neon-drenched cities of the world pulsed with a new kind of energy. Technology was no longer something external, something separate from human experience. It had become an extension of consciousness itself. Global challenges that had once seemed insurmountable now became collaborative opportunities. Space exploration reached unprecedented heights as collective neural networks solved complex computational problems in moments. Environmental restoration became a global, instantaneous effort of coordinated consciousness. The quantum cartographers had not just mapped a new territory. They had opened a gateway to a fundamentally new understanding of human potential. Sophie looked out over the city, her eyes seeing computational landscapes that no one else could comprehend. May's neural implants danced with impossible data streams. James existed in the quantum space between individual and collective consciousness, and Elena Rodriguez smiled. They had not just survived the ultimate technological challenge. They had transcended it. The neon horizon stretched before them, an infinite landscape of possibility, waiting to be explored.